Started. Just so y'all know, in the chat box, I have copied the PowerPoint that I'll be using to present today, as well as a Google Drive folder. The link to the Google Drive I'll explain in a few minutes, so please don't worry, but let's go ahead and get started. So today's topic is about learning frameworks and student experiences within them. So first of all, if this is your first time attending one of our monthly webinars, welcome. We're thrilled to have you here. This is part of the Teaching for Learning and Student Success monthly webinar series that CatchNext hosts, and this is the first one of the 2020-2021 school year. It is held every third Thursday, most months from 3 to 4 p.m. You can look at our newsletter that our communications director, Deborah Macbeth, sends out, or our social media accounts to find the registration links. And as far as opportunities to connect with us, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, you can find our handles there. You're also welcome to, or invited to use the hashtag TFLSS chat. And then as far as all of the services that CatchNext offers as an organization to both students and our student programming and our professional development, please consider checking out our website, catchnext.org. Whoops. Also, just some quick announcements. If you are interested in writing for our in-house journal, the way to start that process would be to contact me. So my email address is there. Our next webinar will be on September the 15th from, the 17th from 3 to 4 p.m. via Zoom. I've gone ahead and put that information up on our CatchNext Facebook page, so that's available. We will be having Dr. Ruth Lopez and Dr. Vincent Garales from the University of Houston talking about their research related to how the community colleges in the Houston area responded to the needs of students right after the impact of Hurricane Harvey. So I think in terms of talking about dealing with trauma, dealing with a global event that impacts multiple parts of students' lives, it will be a really relevant discussion given where we are right now. And if you're a campus partner and have any campus news that you want to share, any sort of virtual events you might be having, any celebrations or anything like that, please feel free to send that information to Deborah Macbeth. She can include that in the CatchNext next newsletter. She usually sends it out around the first of the month. As far as the webinar format goes, everyone should be muted, but just in case you are unmuted, please double check that. Just in terms of courtesy, it helps make it so there's no background noises or interference that can be disruptive or can impede others from being able to hear the speaker. And then please, as far as if you want to keep your webcam on, it's completely up to you. I think, there's been a lot of conflicting information going around about whether or not webcams should be required for our students or not. So please feel free with whatever you're comfortable doing. You are welcome to use the chat function throughout. I'll be having Juan Iga just monitor that while I'm talking, and then toward the end, if you have any comments or questions you want to share, you can do that, or we can go through the process of unmuting you. And then just so you know, there will be a question and answer session after I talk for a little bit. So please feel free to note any questions or comments you have throughout the presentation, just in case you don't want to forget them. So without further ado, I am the presenter. If I haven't met you before, my name is Erin Doran. I am an assistant professor at Iowa State University in the School of Education. I specifically teach mostly in the Community College Leadership Program. And I also work as a part-time consultant for CatchNext, specifically as the Director of Research and Evaluation. So what I will be presenting is a overview of some of the learning frameworks data that I collected during the 2018 Summer Motivational Conference. And then this was data that was analyzed and that I recently published with my former he's still a student in the program, my former graduate assistant, Paul Hingesteg. And so the Google Drive link that I sent actually has the copy of the PowerPoint and then a copy of the PDF of the manuscript that we published. It was published in a journal called the Journal of the First Year Experience and Students in Transition. And so just some things, this provides a big overview of what's in the manuscript, but just some things, if, especially if you're unfamiliar with the work of Catch the Next, that is interesting and relevant to the study. One is we know that in terms of community college students in particular, Latino, Latina, Latinx students, there is an important part of needing validating relationships in order to impact student success. So as far as visual validation, it helps if Latinx students see faculty and staff members who are representative of their culture or of their multiple identities. And we also know from Richard Stanton Salazar's work that it's important for students to reach out to individuals and to be able to tap into institutional agents who can help them navigate their college experience, who can help connect them with other people who can be useful to them, whether that be faculty who can support them, advisors who can help them make informed choices about classes or about financial aid, or just those people who can help students keep going when it gets really tough for them. And we know, especially right now, we're in a period that is particularly tough for faculty, staff, and students. And then Carol Lundberg has done some work about the importance of faculty and student interactions, and how basically the more positive interactions students have with faculty in particular, whether that be both in or out of the classroom, that can be really impactful for student retention. And then some different bodies of literature have talked about the factors that impact transfer. So my mentor, Anne Marie Nunez, had written about the importance of building a transfer culture, how the ways that institutions can demonstrate a commitment to the transfer function of the community college. And so all in all, it's how are community colleges looking at the ways that they can help students achieve the next step, whether that be toward a particular job or a particular vocation, a certificate, whether that be a short or long-term certificate that gets them connected to the workforce, or if that means having the community college really be a platform to the four-year institution and to that baccalaureate degree. And I think Lorenzo Baber's work, in particular this study where he talks about community-based organizations, really helps to kind of support, I think, the mission of Catch the Next in particular, in saying that, you know, the community college does important work, but the community-based organization can also just help tap into students' backgrounds along racial ethnic lines or socioeconomic lines and things like that, and just to help strengthen or reify the work that's going on by the community college. And I think that some of the ways that I've described the work that Catch the Next does is really focused on how can we support community colleges to achieve the work that they're already trying to achieve? How can we boost that? And so as far as the context goes, you know, the Ascender project or the Ascender program operates on campuses throughout Texas. One of the typical courses that students take within the program is the learning frameworks, which may be under education, psychology, education psychology on that campus. And it's a success-oriented course aimed at fostering positive habits and mindsets for our students, not just Latino students, but also first-gen students or students who find themselves in any sort of minoritized category. what's interesting about the learning frameworks is for example, my friend and colleague Daryl Hatch out of the University of Nebraska says that, you know, these are typically considered high impact practices, these student success courses or orientation to college or however you want to call them. So they're framed as these high impact best practices, but interestingly enough, the research literature doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of detail about what about them makes them successful, what about them makes them high impact. And I think there's always the pushback, especially in terms of the context of things like guided pathways or co-requisites, where colleges are really trying to streamline the availability of courses or the options that students can take. And so even within our work as Catch the Next, you know, we've dealt with colleges who are saying like, well, is this course really, really important? And what I really want to emphasize with the work that I did, and something that's not necessarily talked about in the article that I've shared with y'all, is that you know, I at this point had collected data from multiple perspectives on Catch the Next, and had talked to a lot of English and INRW faculty. By the time that I was collecting this data in 2018, I talked to a lot of them. And had less opportunity to study learning frameworks. And then when I came to the motivational conference 2 years ago in Austin to talk to students, yes, the students in other parts of the interviews or other parts of the conversations that I had with them did talk about INRW. They did talk about English. But it was interesting because it felt like when I was asking them questions around what really made a big difference for you in your first year of college and beyond, the content and the mentoring and as I'll explain it, the navigational capital that they got from learning frameworks in particular really seemed to be something that stuck with them throughout the rest of their career, or at least throughout to whatever touch point I was talking to them. Some of the students that I was talking to had just finished their first year, so they might be only about 6 months removed from taking learning frameworks. Some of them were multiple years and reflecting on things that they had learned along the way from their first semester of college. So the framework that we use, and sorry, the circle is a little off. It should be actually down on the navigational capital. But this is the theoretical framework. This comes from Tara Yosa's work on cultural capital wealth, or community cultural wealth. Here, what she is talking about is she's challenging traditional, mainstream, and really what she means is white notions of capital. So, and capital is not necessarily just monetary capital, but it's also like, what are the social networks that folks who tend to be from higher socioeconomic classes or frankly white families tend to have at higher rates than folks from racially or ethnically minoritized backgrounds. And she's challenging the notion that Latino families in particular are at a deficit just by virtue of the fact that they're Latino. And so she conceptualizes these different kinds of capital. And so just very, very briefly, you know, aspirational capital, that Latino families really do want to achieve education. There is a desire to value and to pursue education. Familial capital is just what it sounds like. It's understanding the fact that family and community is extremely important to the Latino community, and that becomes a source of strength. Social capital is the networks that they build, whether that be within communities or relationships on campus or off campus. Navigational capital is the ability to be able to move through social structures, whether that be a college, a university, or a workplace or a job market, for instance. Linguistic capital is just tapping into the fact that many Latinos are bilingual and can move through the world in 2 languages, or 3 if you want to consider Spanglish its own language. And then resistant capital is the ability to resist things like white supremacy or oppression or misogyny or different parts of that. And all in all, like these all come together to create this community cultural wealth around the Latino community in particular. So with this study, we were really focusing on navigational capital in particular. So the ability of students to learn how to move through the community college or the educational system. So as far as what was collected, I conducted interviews with both individual and focus groups. I was able to talk to students across all of the partnering campuses. They're also included, I audio recorded an alumni panel who were speaking to the group at this point. This all took place on in June 2018. If I know the motivational conference this past year because of COVID was canceled, and we're trying to figure out how to do some of that programming virtually this year. If you have never gone to it as a chaperone, or if you've never experienced students who have gone to this conference, I am such an incredible advocate for this motivational conference. It's a really beautiful thing to watch because we have students who are able to see and to stay on the dorms at the UT Austin campus. It quite frankly reminds me of the first time I ever stepped foot on that campus, and just really seeing like what an incredible thing it is to behold, to step onto such a large renowned campus, and to just feel, you know, the legacy, the traditions there, the size of it, and stuff like that. And then, you know, we're there, the CTN programming around the motivational conference talks to students about transfer, about, you know, developing a sense of resilience when things get hard, of learning how to develop habits for coping, you know, to protect their mental health, to deal with stress, and stuff like that. And so it ends up being a, you know, a 2 to 3 day event that is really neat. Students can form community across the CTN campuses. They can also form stronger relationships among current and former ASCENDEF students on their respective campuses. And it's just it's a great event to see. My colleagues within CTN, like Deborah, like Juan, Stacy, they just build a really unique experience for students. So some of the things that I found, what emerged from these interviews. One, I think it's just recognizing that students often come to college, especially if they're first-gen students, which a lot of the CTN students are, that students find themselves wanting to join CTN because they have apprehensions about college before their college experience even starts. And so at the orientation experience or at their initial advising session, when they find out about that program and they find out about the support system that they can step into their first week of school knowing that they already have, that can be something that can be really fascinating, and that can be really helpful for them in just knowing like they're going to be taken care of. And so Emma was really interesting to talk to. By the way, all of the names that I use here are pseudonyms, but Emma was a student at ACC who talked about how she really didn't take high school seriously, and that as she started college, realizing that she was going to have to pay for college herself, that she was entering this new stage of her educational experience, that she was really going to have a shift in mindset and in habits. And so she really started feeling like, oh gosh, if I don't figure out what college is going to be like, then I'm not going to really make it. And so, you know, she really talked about the anxiety that she felt. And then Liliana, who I believe was another ACC student, she was convinced to join the program because her mother told her. that she thought it was a good idea. Her mother had come with her to orientation and had come with her to the initial advising session. They had been talked to about Ascended together, and eventually like went home. Liliana was kind of on the fence about whether or not she wanted to do it. And her mother was the one who said, it's not just for you, it's going to be a support for you. And so that I think is just really interesting, and also kind of conceptualizing the ways that different forms of capital come together. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes, a little bit more. Oop, that's not, sorry. And then here I have a couple of quotes. Again, these are all pseudonyms. So this is how students organize themselves for success. One thing that was super, super interesting to me is that I was doing a focus group with a group of students from San Antonio, and when they were talking about their learning frameworks class, I asked them, what was the most important thing that you learned in learning frameworks? And they all said how to keep a calendar, how to keep their planner, and how to maintain a schedule. And when I asked them, so how many of you keep a planner? And I was talking to probably 6 students in this focus group. They all nodded their heads that they kept one. And in fact, most of them took their planners out of their backpacks and started showing them to me. And if they didn't have their planners with them, then they were showing me their phones. And to me, this was something that was really interesting. And I think that as much as we want to feel like having a planner is very obvious, it's a very basic skill for being an adult, you could argue. I think one of the things, though, that really, really stuck with me was Maite's quote, for example, where she said that for her, she was learning how to do college, but how to fit college in the rest of her life. And so some of the things that she talked about was she was a full-time student, she worked a full-time job, she had caregiving responsibilities at home. She was a busy young woman. And the purpose of the calendar for her was to have this visualization that if she could stick to her calendar, if she could plan everything out, and like she says, do things one by one, don't rush, and just the day will go as it goes, she could at least visualize the way that she could make college fit into her life. And so I think that it serves as this way, not just to keep someone organized, but to keep them from getting overwhelmed to the point that they just give up or really paralyze themselves with anxiety and fear and things like that. And the quote from Alicia that is so funny is just talking about how many calendars she really kept. And there were multiple students who were like, I used to think that keeping calendars or keeping planners was dumb. And now this is something that I really hang on to as a skill to keep me moving forward. And so again, I think this was one of those skills that seems obvious, it seems self-evident, seems basic, whatever you want to say, but it ended up being, for me, probably one of the more interesting things that I personally learned from the students. Some other things that I think, as far as increasing that navigational capital, especially toward the transfer process, the attention to financial aid that students were getting in the Ascended program, I mean, they were, for example, and I've told Stacy this before, Stacy, one of our consultants and one of our partners from Palo Alto, Stacy was really known on her campus as the person who would send out multiple emails, announcements, group texts, and things like that to students with different grants, different scholarships that students could easily apply for. And oftentimes they did really well at getting. Students knew that their learning frameworks professor, for example, Dr. Gomez, was very good at letting them know what sort of scholarship opportunities were available, but then would also be a person who would write those letters of recommendation for them. They knew, and this is, again, you know, it says on this slide, Gina, but then also Crystal and Estela talked about this. They knew that Dr. Gomez would help them regardless of whether or not it was the semester that they were in the class. So from the first semester on through the rest of their time at that college, they knew that they had at least one person they could count on for the financial aid. And there were other like trickle down effects of this, for instance. So for example, you know, being able to apply for financial aid made it so one student got hooked up with a work study job that ended up being in the financial aid office on her campus. And so for her, she talked about being able to learn the ropes and the system of financial aid so that she could help others, whether that be other Ascender students, whether or not that be her younger siblings or cousins or whoever. Or that just be for herself. Some of the other things that students talk about that I explain a bit more in the article is also just all of these other choices around transfer or around planning for your adult life that students were able to build confidence in. So the learning frameworks gives the classroom space for students to look at career exploration, to think about where their strengths are in terms of their skill set or their academic interests, where they want to be. And so, I mean, I talk to students who would say like, well, I know that I want to go into social work, but I also know, for example, in the San Antonio area, neither one of the public institutions in San Antonio offer bachelor's or master's degrees in social work. So I know that I'm going to need to go to St. Mary's. Or I talked to some students who also said, oh, well, I want to go to law school and I know that I want to go into immigration law, for instance, because of the circumstances of my own family. Students were making really informed, confident decisions about what it is that they wanted to do with their lives. There was one student from Palo Alto who talked about, you know, I want to go to the University of Syracuse. And I remember saying like, well, that's kind of okay. Like that's a long way away, but why do you want to go there? And she goes, well, because that way I can go into the ROTC program and ultimately go into the military, but they also have the major that I want to be in, that I believe was in graphic design. So she really had these like clear cut criteria for what it is that she wanted to do and had figured out that the place for her to be would be to go to Syracuse, New York. And then building navigational capital for familia. These were some of the fun ones. Gabriela talked about how she had younger siblings who were about like only 1 to 2 years behind her in high school. And so she was already talking to them about joining Ascender. Angelina had a really funny story about how she took her family to Noche de Familia on her campus, that the students were playing, or the students and the families were playing Loteria, and that her dad won Loteria at that night. And he was so excited because he had never won anything before. And so, you know, the purposes of things like Noche de Familia are to bring the family to the campus to learn about the program, but also they can meet students, professors. I've seen where Ascender campuses have done things like made sure that there was a recruiter or an advisor of some sort, somebody who could talk to students and their family about financial aid. And so it brings the family into the student's college experience, and it helps them to know what steps they can take to support their students. And, you know, that ends up being an incredibly important thing for student retention. And so some of the things like, what does this all mean? I think in terms of tapping into that aspirational capital, students already had that. They were already in college. They wanted some sort of college education, but it helped them hone in on the actual steps that they would need to fulfill whatever dreams or aspirations they had set out for themselves. And in terms of navigation, it helped them figure out how they were going to do it and how they were going, if they needed financial aid to do it, if they needed to make sure that they took certain prerequisites in order to transfer, if they needed to know if they were going to need a graduate degree ultimately to do whatever it is that they wanted to do. So it sets that foundation, or that yellow brick road, so to speak, of whatever students need to do to get where they want to be. And then that familial capital, just building in that familial knowledge and buy-in into students' college going experience. I think that, something that the program does is it provides these prolonged and deeper engagements with faculty and with other students in terms of those on and off campus events, having faculty for more than one semester, or at least like building connections so that faculty are more involved in students' college going experience than just the one semester that they happen to be in the class. And then the engagement with the Ascender Motivational Conference, I think it just helps to build upon what the faculty and staff have done from students' first semester, and reinstills those values or those skills or whatever knowledge students need. It ends up giving them the opportunity to visit a major university and to decide if that's the kind of place where they see themselves, or maybe I know a few students who were like, no, I'm going to go to Texas State, like it's smaller, it's a little bit closer to home, or things like that. But it just gives them that experience to be able to see themselves as university students. I think that it extends the notion of family or familia. We talk about this within CTN professional development all the time, about that as just a very deeply held and central value of the program that we help support on these campuses. So building familias within the classroom and on the college campus, not just students' home life. And then I hope what this study does is help. Yes, the Ascender program offers these high impact and these best practices, but I hope that this is more of a description of how it actually does that. So what about it makes it high impact? Well, students who take these classes are able to get an experience or an exposure to knowledge or processes that maybe they would have not otherwise gotten. And so some limitations to talk about. I mean, I'm the first one to admit that none of my research projects are absolutely perfect. I think that in terms of sampling, the students who go to the motivational conference are likely the ones who are the most engaged with it. I mean, the college or the motivational conference takes place over multiple days. It requires travel for a lot of students. So students that year, 2018, we had students coming in from El Paso, coming in from the Rio Grande Valley. So they might be, have 2 days of travel, 8 to 10 hours of drive time to Austin, plus a couple of days of the conference and things like that. And so those are the students who really want to be there, who are able to take time off of work or to take time away from their families to be able to be there. Excuse me. And, even when I asked students, like, well, was there something about the program that you didn't like or something that you might have changed? They weren't really speaking to any particular shortcomings of the program. That might have been just not wanting to, how do I put this? That's not, that's not a signal that the program's perfect by any means. Students may just not have felt comfortable talking to me about that. And then also, you know, something that we found is that the students who go to the motivational conference also tend to be traditionally aged students, or if they're coming back several years later, they had largely participated in the program when they were like 18, 19, 20 years old. So it's just keeping that in mind as you read the data. But you know, some things that I think we would love to ultimately be able to do is to talk to students who transition to four-year institutions, to find out what kind of impact the Ascender program made, and what sort of skills or knowledge or whatever attitudes that they built in their first year of college by virtue of Ascender. What are those habits that they've kept with them as they've transitioned on to the four-year institution? And then I think it's also worth it to also think about who are the students who maybe didn't maintain strong ties to the Ascender program, and were they able to still be successful? Were they able to still achieve their goals and dreams? Or is there something with the conference or with ongoing programming, you know, that is there a relationship between the touch points and how often students connect with the Ascender program, not just in their first year and beyond, but beyond? And does that make a difference in long-term success? So I don't know. So now I'm ready to open it up for questions and comments. You're more than welcome to put anything in the chat box. Something to point out, one, we want to point out that the virtual Transfer Motivational Conference will take place on Friday, September 25th. So if you have any information, or if you'd like more information about that, please contact Deborah. And then also something that was interesting is the Texas Education Research Center did a commissioned study about CTN. It was commissioned by CTN. And some of the findings that they did say my findings were supported by Turk data that essentially said that CTN students have received more financial aid over the course of their college career versus non-CTN students, and that was just done by like a random sampling of peer institutions and peer students. I think what's interesting about that is that the Turk study and then this study kind of complement each other, because I can explain like, yeah, that's because our faculty and staff do a really wonderful job at connecting students with resources, and students report that directly. So Anne has asked, have I considered using something like Google Forms to reach a wider range of students, not just the ones who attend a conference? Yes. Over the course of the last few years, I have not been successful at recruiting students for research interviews. I've tried to do virtual interviews. I've tried to connect with them via their student Facebook groups, or to get their faculty and their advisors to email them. I remember at one point, one of the Ascender student group presidents tried to organize like a focus group for me and to get some students together. Yeah, exactly, Cynthia. It's just hard to do. And I just also can appreciate that students are really, really hard to, I don't want to say nail down, because they're hard to schedule with, and it's a hard ask for them to make time for me when they're doing so many other things. What will they do about the calendar or planner now? Use Google Calendar or something else? I think that's a great question. I mean, I think considering that there's so many different options out there, like Trello, there's Google, but I think like the Google Suites and all the apps and everything that students have available, like, is just almost ubiquitous now. It would be interesting to know if students are really trying to transition more toward a virtual calendar rather than like a paper planner, just as something that is easier considering so much is tied to email or tied to Canvas or Blackboard or whatever. So I'm not sure. It would be interesting to know if the learning frameworks instructors are teaching, since they're teaching, if they are teaching virtually, like would they want to do things like Google Calendar? Oh, that's great to know. So Anne says that A Plus Credit Union, I'm guessing that's in the Austin area, Anne, has been offering free calendars in the past for students and teachers. Um, I know I'm thinking back to my undergraduate experience, which is, nearly 20 years ago now, but for students who went to orientation, a planner was often something that we received at orientation, like in a goodie bag or things like that. And so I know for me, I still like to buy a new planner every year to try to keep myself organized. Let's see. So Dr. Chavez is asking, can I speak about the surveys we conduct with our students? So Catch the Next does ask that the colleges distribute a survey to students who are in the developmental, whether it be developmental math, developmental reading and writing. And so those are mainly just about asking students, who they are, trying to get demographic information for them. The pre-survey is really just about asking what kind of baseline knowledge they might have about college or about the transfer process. And then we do have a post-survey that we distribute at the end of the fall semester or the end of the semester that students are participating in the program. And we try to track a little bit about growth and whether or not students are reporting a higher degree of confidence in transfer, for instance. With those, I think the survey is something that was developed by the knowledge working group here within CTN a number of years ago. They've talked about how, it's mainly self-reported attitudinal data, not necessarily behavioral data. But I think it's been really good for us to get sort of a macro level view of where students are. What experiences made a big impact on their student experience. So I think overall, for example, Noche de Familia is almost a unanimous, like, beloved event for Ascender students. It really makes a big difference to them, or it's something that really sticks with them long term. So Ronald is asking how we worked with the PUENTE program. We are working to develop this at Houston Community College. Dr. Chavez, would you like to take this?
Yes, thank you. Hi. Our program was actually inspired by the Puente Project in California. They served as vendors to our program, and they helped with our professional development for various years. Um, because we are in Texas and because Texas policy changed over the years, we started in 2012. Our program started to deviate from theirs. For example, we started to concentrate more on advising versus counseling. We also started to focus on prerequisite courses. Our goal was acceleration from day one. And the other key change is that we also started to work with math courses. And in the evolution of prerequisite courses, We then also started to work with other gateway courses that would be paired with a correct course. For example, if a student was in a discipline that didn't require English Comp 2 the second semester of the first year, we would then encourage that the college would pair the class with the reading intensive course. So that has meant that various other disciplines have come into our program, like sociology, psychology, government, and history. We've had art, etc. And so that's how our program changed. And but we definitely recognize their contribution, and as I stated, you know, they were an inspiration to us to have a comprehensive model in place. We're just a little bit more focused on Texas policy and practice, and in particular, the 60 by 30 strategy that former Commissioner Paredes, who actually I believe is with us today, spearheaded in the state. And really thanks to his support, we were able to really evolve with this particular model that has been extremely successful. Since 2012, we've had 83% success rate getting our students out of developmental education. And the study from the Texas Education Research Center actually found that our students get more certificates, more associate degrees, and more bachelor's degrees than the control group of 110,000 Texas students in similar classes. Um, so, you know, we're very grateful to our partners, to our college partners, and we're very grateful to the I guess leap of faith that the commissioner and his staff had in our efforts that allowed us to get this far. Okay.
Great. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, I imagine that being the first week, or for us, this was the first week of the semester, or for some of you, might be the week before the calm before the storm. So, you know, if you don't have any other questions, please don't feel obligated.
I wanted to add, Aaron, that if anyone is in learning more about our program, that they can send us a note, and we can get some more information to them on that option.
All right. Well, you know, please let us know if you have any questions or reach out to us. As I mentioned before, the September webinar will be with my colleagues from the University of Houston, Dr. Ruth Lopez, as well as Dr. Vincent Carales. They will be talking about the research that they did on community colleges in the Houston area and how they responded to students' needs in the aftermath after Hurricane Harvey. So without further ado, unless anybody has any other questions, we will wrap up for the day. So thank you very much for attending. It was wonderful to see everyone.
Thank you. Great job.